You ever seen two grown men in fake police uniforms realize they just tried to bluff a Navy-based security commander? Their faces dropped faster than HOA property values after a scandal. My wife didn't flinch, just held up her ID and asked, "Gentlemen, is there a reason you're impersonating law enforcement on my porch?" Boom! Instant ghost mode. And what triggered all this? A 100-year-old oak tree in our backyard. That's it. Not a meth lab, not a tiger, just a tree. Apparently, in Meadowcrest Hollow, historic oaks are more dangerous than burglars. We'd show them what happens when you mess with the wrong family. If you're watching this video from Texas, comment, "Don't mess with military folks" below. Now, let me tell you the story of how our nightmare HOA tried to intimidate our veteran family and the bitter consequences they faced. My wife Evelyn and I had been searching for our dream home for nearly a year. Let me back up. After 20 years of bouncing between bases and bad mattresses, Evelyn and I were ready to buy a home that didn't come with a lease, a checklist, or a panic button. I'd finally retired from the Army Corps of Engineers, and Evelyn, still active duty, now security chief at Norfolk Naval, wanted a real backyard for our son Liam to finally grow up in. So when we found the brick colonial with that ancient oak anchoring the lot like some grandparent that never stopped watching, we signed faster than a rookie at boot camp. The house was perfect. Quiet street, great school zone, neighbors who waved from behind their window blinds. We thought we'd found peace. What we found was protocol in a pantsuit. That illusion ended with a knock and a woman named Meredith Cranston, HOA president, queen of compliance. She had a blazer sharper than her tone and a welcome basket that smelled more like warning than hospitality. "Just a few friendly reminders," she said, flipping through laminated printouts like we'd joined a cult. She pointed at our oak. "Some homeowners prefer a more uniform aesthetic." I remember Evelyn's back straightening like she'd just been handed orders. "The tree stays," she said, calm as a mission brief. Meredith smiled, like a cat that already caught your scent. That's the moment I realized. We hadn't bought a house. We'd moved onto a battlefield with lawn edging. Meredith wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was testing us, pushing boundaries like a Cold War diplomat. And when Evelyn didn't blink, I saw something shift in Meredith's eyes. Not anger, calculation. We weren't just new residents. We were a problem to be solved. And nothing makes petty people more creative than a challenge wrapped in uniform and discipline. That night, Evelyn brewed coffee and pulled out her planner like she was prepping for deployment. "We need to understand the terrain," she said, already highlighting sections of the HOA covenant. This wasn't going to be resolved with a smile and a plate of cookies. We were up against an alliance of bylaws, passive aggression, and clipped roses. That oak tree, that was our hill. And Meredith Cranston? She had no idea she'd just declared war on a woman trained to handle real insurgents. The first violation notice arrived like a thank you card from a stalker, folded neatly in our mailbox, typed in 12-point passive aggression, and signed with a flourish by the HOA compliance officer. It cited us for exceeding maximum lawn blade height by an estimated 0.3 inches. I stared at it, then at the lawn which I had mowed 2 days ago with military precision. Evelyn read it twice, then once upside down, as if trying to decode an encrypted message. "This isn't about grass," she muttered. "This is about softening the target." And just like that, we knew. We weren't just homeowners, we were being scoped. 3 days later, we got another. This time it was for leaving our garbage bin visible 4 minutes past the acceptable collection window. 4 minutes. As if there were someone sitting across the street with a stopwatch and a grudge. Meredith didn't have to say a word. We knew it was her. Her smile at the HOA jogging club had grown just a little smugger, like a cat that knows it pooped in your shoe and watched you put it on. That bin citation came with a fine, of course, $50, plus a note reminding us of the privilege of living in a well-ordered community. That's what they called it. Privilege. Evelyn turned our dining table into a war room. Out came the laptops, city ordinances, the HOA covenants, 3 highlighters, and her old military legal binder. "They're not playing checkers," she said, spreading out the map of our subdivision like it was a combat zone. "They're using vague language as cover fire." And sure enough, every infraction pointed to the same clause: maintenance must conform to community aesthetic expectations. That's like saying everyone needs to dress in a way that looks good in Meredith's opinion, without telling us what color the uniform is. Evelyn started circling inconsistencies like they were enemy positions. The breakthrough came courtesy of a man named Harold Linwood. A retired poli-sci professor and 10-year HOA survivor, he introduced himself at the community book club after noticing our puzzled expressions during a discussion on Orwell. "You're the New Oak people," he said, shaking my hand with a knowing smile. "You've walked into a slow-motion coup." Harold had finders, actually. He'd kept records of every HOA ruling, board vote, and fine issued over the last decade. Evelyn and I invited him over for coffee and strategy. The man brought spreadsheets like he was declassifying Watergate. Harold didn't just bring paper, he brought patterns, violations clustered in waves around certain properties, most of which had something in common. They were adjacent to undeveloped land. "They pressure you until you list below market," he explained. "Then the developer sweeps in, buys low, and flips the zoning." It was less a neighborhood and more a board game played in secret. We weren't just being harassed, we were being priced out by design. And if Harold's map was right, we weren't the first, just the latest. With every note Harold slid across the table, Evelyn's focus sharpened. Her planner now had tabs. Her tabs had tabs. She started color-coding incidents like battlefield sectors. "We need to isolate patterns of contradiction," she muttered, cross-referencing county ordinances with their internal language. "That's where they're vulnerable. And me? I was in charge of topography. Using my old engineering software, I overlaid drainage plans, tree coverage, and setback lines. The picture became clear. Our oak, aside from being majestic, was in the exact path of a proposed access road on a land development plan no one had mentioned. Meanwhile, the violations kept coming. We got fined for having a hose coiled improperly, whatever that meant. Liam's basketball hoop became an unapproved fixture. Even a small American flag we placed in the yard for Memorial Day was deemed non-conforming. It was like HOA Mad Libs, insert noun, cite subsection, apply, fine. But now, every notice they sent us was getting filed, time-stamped, and backed by municipal law. Evelyn printed out with a smile. "Let them come," she said. "Every shot they fire is just more evidence they're targeting us." What they didn't realize was how much training we had for this. Bureaucracy, please. We were both fluent. Evelyn had dealt with 4-star generals and classified audits. I had survived the Army Corps' procurement office. Their idea of power was a rule book. Ours was knowing how to weaponize it. And with Harold backing us up like a human archive, we weren't just fighting back. We were preparing to prosecute. Late one night, after organizing another week's worth of infractions, Evelyn looked up from her laptop. "They think they're tightening the noose," she said, eyes scanning city zoning maps. "But what they're really doing is creating a paper trail straight to intent, harassment, targeted enforcement, and maybe more." I didn't ask what more meant. I knew. This wasn't just a battle for a tree anymore. This was a war for the right to belong, to exist, to not be priced out of your own damn yard. And we were just getting started. Harold suggested we attend the next HOA board meeting, not to argue, but to observe. "Know your enemy, but also know who's twitching under their thumb," he said. And he was right. The meeting was packed with compliance and complacency. Meredith sat at the head of the table, flipping through notes like a judge ready to gavel someone into oblivion. But what caught my attention was the secretary, Janine. She hesitated before reading each motion, glanced around like someone watching a ship sink, and winced every time Meredith interrupted her. As we left the meeting, Evelyn whispered, "Janine's scared." And scared people sometimes flip. It was our first crack in their polished armor. Evelyn made a note to speak to her privately. Meanwhile, I mapped out every property that had been cited and then sold over the last 2 years. The overlap with Harold's data was undeniable. "This is orchestrated," I said. "And if we prove motive, we prove intent. And if we prove intent," Aviel smiled. Then we bury them in their own paperwork. We didn't want revenge, we wanted proof. They wanted us tired, they wanted us second-guessing whether our tree, our house, our family was worth the fight. But what they got? 2 military vets with nowhere to be and nothing to lose. The HOA thought they were enforcing standards, but they were building a case, our case. And once we were ready, we weren't going to knock politely. We were going to kick the door off its HOA-approved hinges. By month 2, our front yard looked like a forensic crime scene, not because of the lawn, Lord knows I was measuring that thing with a ruler by then, but because Evelyn had turned surveillance into an art form. We were documenting everything, timestamps on the sprinklers, mailbox height with calipers, trash bin movement like it was a security breach. Our neighbors thought we'd lost it. But in war, you don't wait for a drone strike. You start logging flight patterns, and the HOA, they kept poking the bear. Then came Harold again, this time with a whisper and a name. Cynthia Maddox. She used to live in the north corner lot. The one with the wild garden and the white shutters? Forced out last year. We met her 2 days later in the next neighborhood over, tucked into a rental home that felt temporary and tired. Cynthia was polite, but guarded. It wasn't until Evelyn mentioned the oak tree that her eyes changed. They started on me about roses, she said, her voice clipped. Then it was the porch paint, then fences, until we sold. Over tea and a thick folder of documents, Cynthia unraveled the real story. Her home bordered a stretch of green space tied to a quiet rezoning push. Summit Ridge developers had been scooping up parcels through shell LLCs, and properties like hers, and now ours, stood in their way. After I moved, they bulldozed the whole tree line within weeks, she said. Meredith claimed it was storm cleanup. In July, with no storm, she pushed a photo across the table. Orange fencing, survey flags, and a Summit Ridge logo in full display. That wasn't cleanup. That was a handoff. Back home, Evelyn dug in like she was prepping a report for the Pentagon. Financial disclosures, zoning meeting minutes, campaign contributions, it was all there, hiding in plain sight. Meredith Cranston, HOA president and self-proclaimed defender of neighborhood purity, was receiving quarterly payments as a community consultant for a real estate portfolio tied directly to Summit Ridge. I wasn't sure whether to be furious or impressed. She turned her neighborhood into a clearance sale, I muttered. Evelyn didn't laugh. Then the footage came in. Night vision pinged around 1:13 IM input. Movement near the oak. Evelyn rolled it back, frame by frame, until we both saw it. A man in plain clothes with a flashlight and a clipboard, walking our property line. He paused, aimed what looked like a measuring laser at the tree, then took photos. The timestamp, the face, the walk, all matched a man we'd seen before. HOA board member, retired officer, Dale Price, the guy who once told me, with a smirk, "We take community safety seriously here." We scrubbed through more footage. Dale had been coming by weekly, always past midnight, always careful, always just outside the camera's motion range. Until now. Evelyn leaned back, arms folded. "You know what this is?" she said. "This isn't HOA compliance, this is recon." The irony wasn't lost on us. We'd both run ops like this, only our targets were usually hostile compounds, not colonial homes with flower beds and plastic flamingos. It would have been funny if it weren't so calculated. The next morning, Harold called us from his usual coffee perch with something new. Developer maps from a recent land use filing. "Take a look at parcel B," he said. "That parcel? Our yard, right over the oak." In fact, it had already been sketched with a dotted easement labeled road access conditional. Evelyn stared at it in silence. "They're planning like they've already won," she finally said, "which means they've got someone feeding them confidence." Meredith wasn't just aligned with the developers, she was executing the plan. Meanwhile, we kept getting notices. A new one appeared about Liam's chalk art being distracting to passing vehicles. Another for overuse of solar lighting. It was like HOA bingo, just waiting for a square to say breathing improperly. But the tone had changed. less smug, more desperate. They knew we were building something, even if they didn't know what. Meredith's glance at the last HOA picnic lingered a little too long. Bill stopped waving entirely. That week, we decided to talk to Janine, the board secretary who looked like she was aging in dog years. Over lemonade on our porch, she cracked. "They told me not to ask questions," she said. "Told me it was all for the good of the community. But then Walter started showing up at night with maps. Meredith said if I didn't log the minutes just right, they'd vote me out." She looked at Evelyn. "I'm not a fighter, but I can hand you the records." And just like that, we had an inside witness. Every file Janine gave us was gold. Backdated votes, missing records, fine templates. Proof that Meredith and her clique were bending the HOA into a battering ram for Summit Ridge. We had the pattern, the motive, and now we had the names. This wasn't about grass height or mailbox color. This was real estate espionage in khakis and khaki-colored lies. And the oak tree in our backyard, that was the only thing still standing between a corrupt plan and a paved driveway. Go on offense. Evelyn started compiling an evidence report, organizing everything with the same methodical ferocity she used for base security audits. I booked a meeting with the county clerk to confirm zoning histories. Harold reached out to a journalist contact with ties to a local corruption blog. The lines had been drawn, and the next phase wouldn't be passive. They wanted us quiet. We'd been. But when you threaten a soldier's family and lie in ink, you better expect pushback in permanent marker. The night it happened, I was 3 states away, eating lukewarm conference chicken in a Marriott ballroom while my wife prepared to dismantle a criminal conspiracy from our front porch. I'd flown out for a 2-day engineering expo, thinking maybe the HOA would pause the nonsense long enough to recalibrate their petty. They didn't. At 8:42 p.m., our doorbell rang. Evelyn was home alone with Liam, who'd just finished brushing his teeth and was upstairs, deciding whether his socks could qualify as pajamas. The doorbell camera caught the scene, 2 men in what appeared to be sheriff's uniforms. Dark, official, confident, but Evelyn knew posture, cadence, and authority the way most people know coffee orders. And these 2? They weren't right. Their badges didn't catch the light correctly, their name tags were off-center, and their script felt rehearsed. "Ma'am?" the taller one began. "We're with the County Sheriff's Department. We have an enforcement order regarding multiple code violations and a standing eviction notice." Evelyn didn't blink. "Mind if I take a closer look?" she asked, unlocking the screen door but keeping the security chain latched. She took the document and flipped it under the foyer light, already spotting 3 inconsistencies. 1, the county seal was blurred. 2, the judge's name was misspelled. And 3, the kicker. The word jurisdiction had an I and an E in the wrong places. That's a new one," she muttered. Then louder, "Gentlemen, before I entertain this any further, I'd like your badge numbers and unit supervisor." At that moment, Liam peeked down the stairs. "Mom?" he called, his voice high and nervous. Evelyn stayed calm. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Go back to bed, please." But inside her gears were turning. She'd already texted Officer Jamila Wells, her contact at the actual sheriff's department, and clicked the security system into full record mode. "Ma'am," the second man said, shifting nervously. "If you don't comply, we'll have to initiate removal protocol." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Removal protocol?" she repeated. Interesting phrase. Sounds more like pest control than policing. She let the silence stretch. "Gentlemen," she said finally, "I'm Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Hayes, active duty Naval Security Forces. You are on my property with falsified documents and are impersonating law enforcement. That's a federal offense." Then she reached behind her and held up her ID. Clean, sharp, unmistakable. The taller man blanched. The shorter one stammered. We were just hired to deliver the paperwork. That's it." "By whom?" Evelyn asked, still recording. "We don't know names," he said. "Just instructions." Evelyn's voice dropped to something lower and colder than either of them expected. "Then let me help you remember. Was it Dale Price? Was it Meredith Cranston?" That was when the shorter man cracked. "Dale," he whispered. He said the woman wouldn't be a problem if the husband wasn't around. Just snap a photo, scare her a little, and bounce. Evelyn didn't blink. She stepped back and said, "You'll want to stay put. Actual law enforcement is en route." Within 5 minutes, the flashing lights hit the street. Jamila arrived with 2 deputies who handled the arrest like it was routine, but Evelyn knew the real surprise was unfolding inside those squad cars. Both men rolled. Names, instructions, payments, all of it. Turns out they weren't officers, they were ex-mall security with a side hustle impersonating real ones. One had done contract intimidation before. Dale Price had paid them in cash to serve fake eviction threats and take photos of the oak tree while I was out of town. By the time I landed the next morning, the HOS story had taken a sharp left turn. Evelyn had already reported everything to her commanding officer. The Navy had protocols for exactly this kind of security breach. We weren't just dealing with property harassment anymore. This was now a federal matter. Falsified court orders, impersonated lawmen, and targeted threats against a military officer and her family. The HOA had crossed a line they couldn't wiggle back over. We turned our dining room into a war table again. But now the mission was justice. Evelyn coordinated with Jamila and Base Legal. I reached out to Harold, who was already compiling a greatest hits folder on Dale Price. "Did you know he resigned from the police force 5 years ago under investigation for falsifying reports?" Harold said, flipping through old articles like a human search engine. Meredith kept that part out of the HOA newsletters. The rhetorical moment hit me that night when I watched the security footage again. Evelyn, standing calm, badge in hand, while 2 grown men in fake authority unraveled like cheap vinyl chairs. When a tree stands tall, I said to myself, it attracts wind. But when that tree is your anchor, you brace for the storm and push back. This wasn't just about a tree anymore. It was about dignity, boundaries, and what happens when you threaten a woman trained to defend both. That weekend, the neighborhood buzzed with questions. Meredith was suddenly unavailable for comment. Dale's black SUV didn't cruise past our driveway anymore. The same folks who once waved politely and looked away were now pausing their walks near our fence, their expressions less judgmental and more curious. The story was shifting, and so was the neighborhood weather. But we weren't finished, not by a long shot. We still had to prove intent. The arrests were real, but the conspiracy behind them still lived in HOA records, developer contracts, and a tangled web of cash payments that hadn't yet seen daylight. Evelyn drafted a formal complaint to the state licensing board. I worked with Harold to identify previous homeowners pushed out by similar tactics. Janine, our once shaky secretary, had started forwarding internal emails. The house of cards Meredith built was wobbling, and we were done playing their game by their rules. You know the funny thing about power? It's loud when it's fake, and silent when it's real. Evelyn didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She didn't even flinch. She just stood her ground, let the truth walk right into her doorway, and watched it collapse under its own weight. That night, she tucked Liam into bed like nothing had happened. No speeches, no drama. Just a reminder to wash behind his ears. Because real strength isn't flashy. It's quiet, unshakable. And this storm? It had just met the wrong house to blow past. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. on a Thursday, conveniently overlapping with youth soccer, dinner prep, and a town hall meeting 2 zip codes over. Classic tactic. Fewer witnesses, fewer questions. But word had spread since the fake cop fiasco, and the clubhouse was packed anyway. Meredith sat at the center of the board table, flanked by her usual lieutenants, one of whom was nursing a hand injury from accidentally slamming a car door. Sure. And beside her sat the real surprise, Ryan Deacon, an HOA attorney known for winning by intimidation and billing by the breath. We didn't bring a lawyer. Just Evelyn's binder, my engineering briefcase, and the calm of 2 people who knew how to win a battle before the first shot was fired. We took our seats in the front row. Meredith tried not to look at us, but her smile twitched like a muscle on the verge of cramping. Ryan opened with flair. Due to the homeowner's repeated violations, including failure to remove a structurally hazardous tree, the board has initiated legal action. He handed out glossy packets, photo-enhanced, bullet-pointed, polished. Evelyn stood with the calm precision of someone who'd once briefed three-star admirals. Before this meeting continues, I'd like to confirm the origin of this arborist report. She held up the same document Ryan had just quoted. Martin Consulting, correct? Ryan nodded, confident. Fully licensed and bonded. Evelyn turned to the projector and clicked. Up popped a document from the State Business Registry. Martin Consulting was dissolved 18 months ago. License expired, no current employees, no bonding. The room exhaled. The room shifted. Eyebrows rose. Someone coughed. Ryan's neck flushed pink. That's irrelevant, he said, fumbling. The data still speaks for itself. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. The data, she said, was signed by a ghost company. Any legal proceeding based on this document is fruit from a poisoned tree. A few neighbors gasped at the wordplay. Ryan tried to push through, but now the air was different. The power had moved. That's when I stood up. If I may, I said, laying down copies of city zoning records. This oak tree sits directly in the path of a proposed access road, filed 6 months ago by Summit Ridge Development. The same Summit Ridge currently paying Meredith Cranston as a community advisor. I paused. You can call it oversight, or you can call it what it looks like. Silence. And then a voice in the back. What does it look like? I didn't answer. I let the room fill in the blank. Evelyn flipped to a slide showing HOA budget allocations. And here's the financial record showing Meredith authorized disbursements for legal consultations with no itemized breakdown. The same week Dale Price was paid in cash. Meredith finally spoke. This is absurd. You two have twisted every document into conspiracy theory. She turned to Ryan. Can we move to close the meeting? But Ryan looked less certain now. He was flipping through Evelyn's handouts like a man realizing his parachute might be a picnic blanket. That's when the room stirred again, because standing quietly near the entrance was a man in a gray suit, expression neutral but posture unmistakably federal. FBI Special Agent Marcus Fields. He didn't announce himself. He just nodded once at Evelyn and sat in the back. Meredith saw him and faltered. Her mouth opened, then closed. You could almost hear her mental gears grinding without oil. The crowd picked up on it instantly. Fear doesn't need subtitles. Janine, the board secretary, raised a shaky hand. Point of order, she said. We've heard serious accusations and verified inconsistencies. I motion to suspend board proceedings pending investigation and propose a vote of no confidence in President Cranston. Meredith's voice cracked. You don't have authority. But the words were empty now. Her backing had vanished like HOA fines on inspection day. Someone seconded the motion before she could finish. The vote wasn't even close. 34 homeowners in favor, 4 against, 3 abstained. Meredith sat frozen, blinking at the result as if math had betrayed her. She tried to stand and leave, but Agent Fields stood too. Ms. Cranston, he said calmly, we'd like to speak with you before you go. He didn't need to say more. She sat back down. Not from courtesy, from instinct. Predators know when they're no longer the apex. Ryan tried to slip out during the commotion, but Harold caught him at the door and handed him a folder. For your records, he said, might want to brush up on conflict of interest statutes. Ryan didn't reply, just took the folder and vanished like a magician with a bad review. The clubhouse buzzed with whispers, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was release and momentum. Janine was named interim president by unanimous vote. The first motion she passed? A full forensic audit of HOA finances. The second? Immediate suspension of all pending fines and enforcement actions. Neighbors who had once cowered now stood taller, exchanging nods and even a few cheers. It felt like waking up from a long, bad dream where your house was under siege by pastel-colored tyranny. Evelyn and I stayed after the meeting, answering questions, handing out documents, and promising to support the cleanup. The oak tree, once framed as a threat, was now protected by the very covenant Meredith had tried to bury. Turns out she'd misquoted it for years. The clause called heritage trees community anchors. Just like that, the tree was untouchable. Poetic justice doesn't always rhyme, but when it lands hard. Back at home, Liam hugged Evelyn and asked if the bad people were gone. She smiled. "For now," she said, "but more importantly, we're not afraid of them anymore." That night, we sat under the oak tree, now bathed in soft solar lights and surrounded by neighbors who had come by to say thank you. We weren't just fighting for ourselves anymore. We were defending the kind of neighborhood that deserved to be proud of itself again. I looked at Evelyn and grinned. Meredith brought a flamethrower to a chess match, I said. Unfortunately, we'd already trapped her king. Evelyn didn't laugh. She just clinked her iced tea against mine and whispered, "Checkmate." By the time the leaves turned, everything had changed. The HOA board looked nothing like it did a few months ago. The polyester blazer brigade had been replaced with actual neighbors, folks who didn't memorize code violations but knew your kid's soccer schedule and whether your dog liked belly rubs. Janine took the presidency on a temporary basis, then handed it off to Carla Martinez, a retired teacher with a calming voice and a gift for diffusing drama with baked goods. The HOA meetings now had coffee and brownies. You could taste the reform. When the FBI's final report came in, it was almost anticlimactic. Meredith Cranston had, in fact, funneled HOA reserve funds into consulting payments that were then kicked back through shell entities tied to Summit Ridge. Her community advisor role was real in title only. The paper trail Evelyn uncovered had been airtight. Agent Field summarized it best during his debrief with Jamila. She used public trust like poker chips and lost the house. Meredith took a deal. So did Dale Price, who pled out to falsifying records and impersonating law enforcement. His plea deal came with community service and a permanent ban from holding any neighborhood position ever again. Small price for a man who once used a clipboard like a weapon. Summit Ridge, that glass tower dream of concrete profits and rezoned backdoor deals, quietly withdrew its applications the next week. The city council rescinded all pending permits, citing community pushback and irregularities in submission. Translation, they saw the torch line coming and opted not to be flammable. The developer's local rep skipped town. Their branded banners disappeared overnight, and that proposed access road that was supposed to split our backyard never broke ground. Liam's swing stayed exactly where it belonged, centered under the old oak's shadow, not a bulldozer in sight. Meanwhile, the neighborhood came back to life. It started with small things. A potluck organized by Harold turned into a full-blown block party. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years now traded recipes and raised toasts. The new board launched a neighborhood book exchange, a kids' bike co-op, and even a Saturday morning dads group that somehow always met near our oak tree. I don't know if it was the legal victory or just the relief of having survived the HOA Hunger Games, but something softened here. Something healed. The oak became more than a tree. It became headquarters. The neighborhood kids voted unanimously to call it the fort. Liam and 3 of his friends hung a rope swing, staked out borders with garden stones, and even built a miniature mailbox. One afternoon, I walked out and found a hand-painted sign that read, "No HOA Zone." Evelyn laughed so hard she nearly fell off the porch swing. And you know what? We left it up. Because that tree didn't just survive, it led. It shaded conversations, anchored new friendships, and gave our street something it hadn't had in a long time, a center. That winter, the HOA newsletter came with a recipe, not a warning. The headline read, "Hot cider, cold days, and warmer neighbors." I nearly framed it. Carla added a section for Yard of the Month, which was more about celebrating creativity than conformity. One neighbor won because their front lawn hosted a snowman building competition with buckets of hot chocolate for every participant. No fines, no passive-aggressive notes, just smiles and a few crooked carrot noses. Evelyn took on an informal role as community watch lead. Not the clipboard kind, the kind that waves at delivery drivers and texts if someone's dog gets loose. Jamila stayed in touch, occasionally checking in with updates on the last pieces of the case. She told us one thing that stuck with me. What you all did? Most people back down. But because you didn't, this became bigger than your block. It was humbling and a little surreal. We hadn't started out to be heroes, just homeowners who refused to be hushed. One Sunday afternoon, Liam came running in from the tree, cheeks flushed and triumphant. "Dad, we found a blue jay nest!" He dragged me outside to see, and sure enough, nestled in a crook just above the old swing, a mama bird sat guarding 3 tiny eggs. We watched from below, quiet. "Do you think she knows it's safe here now?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I was too busy trying not to cry like a Hallmark dad in a holiday movie. Finally, I said, "Yeah, buddy, I think she knows exactly that." That night, we hosted a backyard dinner under the oak. Nothing fancy. Folding chairs, twinkle lights, crock pots. Carla brought cider. Harold told stories. Someone passed around a ukulele. Evelyn and I sat back, holding mugs, listening to laughter, the kind that comes easy, the kind that hadn't lived on this block in years, the kind that makes you believe maybe some places can heal, maybe some scars aren't warnings, they're foundation. A few weeks later, we got a handwritten thank you note in our mailbox, no envelope, just folded paper and a red crayon signature from one of the neighborhood kids. "Thank you for saving the tree. It's my favorite place." It was the kind of message that didn't need spelling to be perfect. Evelyn stuck it on the fridge right next to Liam's spelling test and a magnet shaped like a coffee mug. "This," she said, tapping the note, "this is why we fought." There's something poetic about that, you know, the idea that resistance can be soft, that sometimes the boldest stand isn't loud or angry, it's rooted, steady, quietly defiant. That tree had survived storms, bad policy, fake cops, and one very determined HOA president. And yet there it stood, draped in string lights, covered in chalk doodles, and now home to a blue jay family and a dozen new memories. I raised my glass and tapped the side. "Some trees," I said, "are meant to fall. And some were born to stand." I looked at Liam, sitting proudly beneath that oak with his friends. This one didn't just stand, it rooted us, and we're not going anywhere." As the sun dipped below the rooftops and shadows stretched across the lawn, I stood alone beneath that old oak. Hands in my pockets, heart a little heavy but mostly full. You fight for your house, thinking it's about property lines or bylaws. But it's not. It's about dignity. About saying no, not today, not on my watch. It's about proving that quiet people with full lives and long patience can still outmaneuver bullies in bullrooms and khaki-wrapped tyrants with clipboards. We didn't just protect a tree. We reminded our neighborhood what roots really mean. And in doing that, we found ours. Now, if you've made it this far, I want you to really think about what this story's taught us. That power doesn't always scream. It sometimes stands silent and still, like an old oak refusing to fall. If this story meant something to you, if it made you laugh, nod, or clench your jaw at the injustice, go ahead and hit that like button. Share it with someone who knows the pain of being underestimated. Drop a comment below. Tell us where you're listening from or what your HOA story is. Because this is where we build something real. And if you don't want to miss the next time we take on corruption, stupidity, or just plain poetic justice, subscribe, because around here, we don't just tell stories. We stand for the people who can't. Stick around, the next tale's already growing roots.